I was thousands of miles away, serving my country on foreign soil, when everything began to unravel. One evening, while checking my mail during a rare moment of downtime, I came across a letter from my homeowners association, HOA. The envelope, bearing an ominous red stamp, hinted that something was amiss. My heart sank as I opened it, revealing that my home was no longer listed under my name. Confusion quickly turned to panic. How could this be possible? The letter stated that my property had been sold due to unpaid HOA dues, a claim that seemed utterly unfounded. I had always ensured my bills were paid promptly, even while deployed. The idea that my house, the home I had worked so hard to afford, could be sold without my consent seemed not just unfair, but utterly surreal. At first, I assumed it was some sort of administrative error. But as I dug deeper, I realized the situation was far worse. The letter included legal documentation confirming the sale, as well as notices I allegedly ignored. Yet, I had never seen those notices. Something didn't add up. What haunted me most was the timing. Here I was dedicating my life to defending my country, only to find my own rights as a homeowner stripped away in my absence. It was as if I had been betrayed by the very system I was fighting to protect. I spent hours combing through my financial records, convinced I could prove my innocence. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a mistake. It was intentional. Someone had orchestrated this behind my back. That letter marked the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. It was a warning that my life was about to spiral out of control, and I had no idea how to stop it. Being a soldier means sacrificing so much: time with family, personal safety, and sometimes even your future. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that sacrifice would include losing my home. My deployment had been tough, filled with long days, sleepless nights, and the constant pressure of staying vigilant. Home was supposed to be my sanctuary, my reward for enduring the hardships of military life. Every time I thought of my house, I pictured the life I'd return to: the porch where I would sip coffee, the living room where I'd planned to spend time with friends and family. It was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of stability in an otherwise chaotic world. To learn that it had been taken from me felt like a slap in the face. While I fought battles abroad, the war at home raged in a courtroom I didn't even know existed. The HOA's actions seemed calculated, preying on my inability to be physically present to defend myself. They had sent notices to an address they knew I couldn't access, and their timing left no room for me to intervene. The betrayal cut deep, especially because I trusted the HOA to manage the neighborhood in good faith. I never imagined that the very organization meant to protect the community would exploit a service member's absence for financial gain. Despite the anger and frustration, I reminded myself why I was serving. My duty wasn't just for my own benefit, it was for my fellow Americans. Ironically, that sense of duty became the driving force behind my fight to reclaim my home. It didn't take long for me to uncover the source of the problem: the HOA's leader. Known for his aggressive tactics and questionable ethics, he had a reputation for running the association like a personal fiefdom. Rumors swirled about backdoor deals, exorbitant fines, and sudden foreclosures, but few dared to challenge him. When I looked into the details of my case, I realized just how deeply he was involved. He had fast-tracked the sale of my home, bypassing standard procedures and exploiting loopholes in the HOA's bylaws. What shocked me most was learning that he had purchased the property himself, at a fraction of its value, through a shell company he controlled. This was no simple misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of greed. The HOA leader had turned his position into a weapon, targeting homeowners who were vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. My deployment had made me the perfect victim, and he had pounced without hesitation. Determined to expose the truth, I began gathering evidence. I contacted neighbors who had faced similar issues, combed through public records, and even hired a private investigator. What we uncovered painted a damning picture of corruption, manipulation, and outright theft. The more I learned, the more resolved I became to take him down. This wasn't just about getting my home back. It was about holding him accountable and preventing him from ruining anyone else's life. The process of selling my home without my consent was as cunning as it was infuriating. It started with fabricated notices of unpaid dues, which the HOA leader claimed had been sent repeatedly. In reality, these notices were sent to an outdated address, ensuring I would never see them. Next came the foreclosure process. Using state laws that allowed HOAs to auction properties for unpaid fees, he initiated the sale with barely any oversight. The entire process, from the alleged delinquency to the auction, took place in just a few weeks. It was an orchestrated heist, and I wasn't the only victim. I later learned that the HOA leader used this tactic frequently, targeting homeowners who were deployed, elderly, or otherwise unable to defend themselves. The profits he made from flipping these properties were staggering, all while the community remained unaware of his schemes. What made my case even more egregious was the price at which my house was sold. It was auctioned for less than half its market value, leaving me not only homeless, but also financially devastated. The new owner? None other than the HOA leader's shell company. When I finally returned from deployment, I was eager to settle back into the life I had left behind. But the moment I arrived at my old address, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. My house, the place I had poured my heart and soul into, was occupied by strangers. The sight of another family living in my home was surreal. Their kids played in the yard I had once mowed, and their car sat in the driveway where mine should have been. I felt like a ghost, watching someone else live the life I had built. At first, I approached them calmly, hoping to resolve the situation. They were sympathetic but firm. They had purchased the property legally and had no intention of leaving. My frustration grew as I realized that the HOA leader's actions had not only robbed me, but had also put this family in a difficult position. Unable to access my home, I rented a small apartment nearby and began to piece together my next steps. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to fight back. This wasn't just about reclaiming my house. It was about reclaiming my dignity. When it became clear that my rights had been trampled, I knew I had to take action. But where would I start? I was a soldier, not a legal expert, and the idea of taking on an HOA, especially one led by someone as manipulative as its leader, felt daunting. The first step was finding the right legal representation. After days of searching and countless calls, I finally connected with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. When I explained my situation, his initial reaction mirrored my own disbelief. "They did what?" he asked, his tone laced with outrage. Together, we began building a case. We compiled all the documentation I had, from bank statements proving I was up to date on payments to records of my deployment that showed I couldn't have possibly ignored the supposed notices. The evidence was mounting, but we knew this wouldn't be easy. HOAs often wield significant power, and their leaders are well-versed in legal loopholes. What gave me hope, however, was my lawyer's determination. He assured me that we could not only fight back, but also hold the HOA accountable for their actions. Filing the lawsuit was the first tangible step toward justice. The lawsuit I filed against the HOA wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about sending a message. I sued for $700,000 in damages, a number that reflected both the value of my home and the emotional turmoil I had endured. The HOA, unsurprisingly, fought back with everything they had. Their legal team argued that they had followed the law to the letter and that I was at fault for not responding to their notices. But with the evidence we had gathered, it was clear that their actions were anything but lawful. The courtroom became a battlefield of its own. Witnesses were called, including neighbors who testified about the HOA leader's shady practices. One brave former board member even admitted that the leader often manipulated votes and concealed financial information to maintain control. Despite the overwhelming evidence on my side, the process was grueling. The HOA's team used delay tactics, hoping to wear me down or force me into a settlement. But I refused to back down. This was about more than money. It was about principle. There were times during the legal battle when I felt like giving up. The stress of reliving the ordeal, combined with the financial strain of paying legal fees, took a heavy toll. Nights were sleepless, and the weight of uncertainty loomed over every aspect of my life. At my lowest point, I began to question whether the fight was worth it. My lawyer reassured me, reminding me of the progress we had made, but doubt crept in nonetheless. What if the system failed me again? What if the HOA's leader walked away unscathed? A turning point came during a conversation with a fellow soldier. "You've faced worse," he said, his words steady and sure. "This is just another fight, and you don't quit fights." His perspective reignited my determination. If I could survive the challenges of war, I could survive this. With renewed resolve, I doubled down on the case. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner who had been wronged by people abusing their power. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the HOA leader's web of lies was beginning to unravel. The breakthrough came when my legal team presented a damning piece of evidence, an email exchange showing the leader's direct involvement in the fraudulent sale of my home. The emails revealed how he had manipulated the HOA board into approving the foreclosure, bypassing necessary checks and balances. Even more shocking, they included discussions about how to maximize profit from vulnerable homeowners. The courtroom fell silent as the emails were read aloud. It was the smoking gun we needed to prove not only my case, but also the extent of the HOA leader's corruption. Witnesses who had been hesitant to speak out before now came forward, emboldened by the evidence. The judge's expression said it all. The tide had turned, and for the first time, I felt like justice was within reach. When the verdict finally came, it was everything I had hoped for. The court ruled in my favor, awarding me the $700,000 in damages and nullifying the sale of my home. The HOA leader was removed from his position, and criminal charges were recommended against him for fraud and embezzlement. Reclaiming my home was bittersweet. While it felt incredible to stand in my living room again, the experience had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. The fight had cost me time, money, and peace of mind, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience and standing up for what's right. I've since made it my mission to warn others about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. I've spoken at community meetings, shared my story online, and even partnered with organizations advocating for HOA reform. If my ordeal could help prevent just one family from going through the same nightmare, then it wasn't all in vain. Through it all, I've learned that no matter how strong your opposition, the truth has a way of coming to light. Justice isn't always swift, but it's worth fighting for, especially when the stakes are as personal as your home.